your fire burn. Let your fire burn.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Porcupine Perspective. Thank you for joining us for another, hopefully, fun-filled episode. I'm joined in studio with Evelyn. Evelyn, how are we doing today?
I'm doing okay. It's been a long day. I'm getting back to the gym again, and my head doesn't like it, so I've been fighting a headache all day. But hey, you know what? That's how we get healthy, right?
Now, you said your head doesn't like it. You're not supposed to lift weights with your head.
Clearly. Thank you for that observation. No, it's probably just from moving around more and elevated blood pressure for a while. It gives me a headache whenever I haven't been going for a while, and then I start working out again. Something about it just until my body equalizes with the shock of having to do it. Yeah, it just leaves me with a pretty solid rockin' headache there for a while.
And you said only I gave you headaches.
Well, you know, somebody has to make your wife feel, so, you know, somebody gets her.
I got you. A little empathy.
Exactly.
Anyway, I remember we originally had talked about we wanted to do an episode on Killdozer and a few other things, but you kind of put a stop to that and had this really earth-breaking, ground-shattering...
Oh,
yeah, I'm building it up for a reason.
Yeah, no, you're not. No, we were kind of just tossing around some ideas of what to talk about this week. Of course, Killdozer was there on the list somewhere, which maybe towards the end, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, we'll kind of throw that in. Part of the process of trying to find what we want to talk about for the week involves kind of cruising through the news, what's popping up, what are some current events, what's something that kind of sparks that conversation for us. And as I was scrolling through, I think I made some kind of offhand comment about, well, the only thing that's showing up is this stupid thing with Beyonce and her crew going after this lady who slighted her in some imagined way. And kind of stopped and like, well, what? And so I proceeded to explain it, and it led us kind of down a path into what we were going to talk about today. So I figured maybe today we could kind of start off with the conversation, or what I had noticed offhand, and how it kind of led us to the point we're going to be discussing. What do you think?
I think I'm probably going to have a lot of questions, being that, one, I barely even know who Beyonce is, let alone what's going on. Now, you said slighted. Was this something like she said in a bad Facebook post or on Twitter, or what happened?
No, it was really something completely offhand. The NBA finals are going on. They were in the middle of Game 3. And she and her husband, Jay-Z, Beyonce and her husband, Jay-Z, were at the game courtside. Well, they were sitting next to another couple. So it was Jay-Z and then Beyonce next to him. On the other side of Beyonce was a woman named Nicole Curran. Curran, I'm not sure. I think it's Curran. Her husband is the owner of the Warriors, another NBA team.
Okay.
As they were sitting there at some point, Nicole kind of leaned across and was saying something to Jay-Z. There's no audio. All you had was some video feed during the game. And he kind of leaned back and said something else. And as they were conversing, it's impossible to tell what the exact facial expression meant. Was she kind of smiling? Was she irritated? We have no idea. But somebody took like a freeze frame of this, and Beyonce's followers, big fans, Beyonce's followers are her biggest fans, essentially call themselves, I think, the Bayhive. And they all launched a full-blown attack on this woman, Nicole Curran. And there were comments, something along the lines of, man, if she ever shot me a look like that, I'd just roll over and die. And
Nicole Curran or Beyonce?
The look that was on Beyonce's face.
Okay.
But again, there's no context. You have no idea what happened, what was going on, what conversation was, and it was literally just a few seconds that happened to get caught on camera. And it blew up. These fans ended up attacking this other woman and were seriously sending her death threats over social media to the point where she had to disable her account.
Over a still image with no context?
Where Beyonce may or may not have looked irritated. Mm-hmm.
I need to back this up. So you've got individuals, at least two of which are famous, and they're sitting courtside. Mm-hmm. And two of them are having a conversation across someone else. Someone grabs a still. I mean, you probably don't even know if Beyonce just had gas at that point. You get where I'm going with it,
Mhm.
and they're full-blown attacking this lady who really didn't do anything.
Apparently, there was just things about her being her disrespecting Beyonce by leaning over her to speak to her husband. And there were people, I guess, likening it. I looked into it more once it sparked the conversation for us, and they were likening it to an album that Beyonce had done where she had discussed somebody that Jay-Z had cheated on her at one point, and people were just all up in arms thinking this woman was doing something untoward towards her husband. And it ended up that she had, in actuality, leaned across to ask Nicole Curran. Curran, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name. If anybody knows and I'm doing it wrong, I apologize. But she had leaned across to ask Jay-Z if he wanted a lime in the drink he had ordered. And he was responding in kind, and that was the entire deal there. So to say this was completely overblown is an insane understatement. Anyway, so this was what was on there, and this was all over the news. Every platform I went on to, this was a thing that was on there, that people were so upset that that somebody had dared to disrespect this performer.
You know what? That reminds me. Now I've got some context. There was this meme that was floating around, and it had a picture of a TV, and on the TV was Beyonce. And then right below it, in not the fine print, but you know, when it's not the featured story, but they have the ticker across the bottom, there was something about a missile strike hitting some civilians in Yemen, if I remember correctly. And the meme was talking about how one thing was what was being reported, but what is actually news was just on the little baby ticker. That's not what we're focused on. You telling me this, now I understand the meme a little better. It's like, well, maybe Beyonce was putting on a concert or something happened, or...
Right, and again, next week this won't be on the radar anymore, so... And I apologize for making everybody listen to 7-8 minutes of Beyonce talk. But the reason I wanted to preface this was just, this was such an insanely overblown situation over something that was literally somebody saying that she was just trying to be a good hostess. You know, they invited them out, I guess, and she was just asking if he wanted something with his drink. And it turned into her getting death threats from people who have no actual vested interest in this at all. But when we started talking about it, it kind of led us down to the conversation of how do you start to change people's minds through even the medium that what we're doing here, and trying to open people's eyes and have them look at the world in a little bit of a different way, when the only thing that they see is this bombardment from social media of things that in the grand scheme of things really don't matter. But that's all that matters.
It doesn't make sense. What you're saying makes sense, but yes, the concept in and of itself does not make sense. I can remember episodes not too long ago when we were talking about the MAGA kids that were at the memorial, or Jussie Smollett, or I'm not going to go down the whole list, but it seems like there are two polar opposite reactions. Well, let's say three. There's one, disinterest. Then you have extreme like and extreme dislike, hatred. And everything seems to be funneled into one of these three directions. Something as innocuous as this, we have this immediate overreaction. And for me, what is so strange about this is we live in an age and a time where we have access to information we never had when I was growing up. I'm in my 40s. But it seems like despite all this information, we lack the ability to actually think critically, spend some time to figure out, hey, there may be something else going on. Maybe I shouldn't leap to conclusions based on a still image grabbed off.
Right, but I mean, take a look at the world that we live in now. I mean, everything is, what is that? Not ready-made, but
instant gratification?
Instant gratification. Thank you. Like I told you, I'm not braining well today. You're going to have to bear with me, everybody. I'm so sorry. But it is. Everything's instant gratification, instant updates, instant photos, instant everything. Why bother critically thinking? You need to have that immediate reaction. You need to have that immediate comment, that immediate post. You've got to be on there before the next thing comes up, and then you're jumping on that one. It's so much hitting you all at one time, and it's go, 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 go. When do you critically think?
Or do you even? Or let me drill out for a minute. It almost appears on the surface, and I'm not a psychologist, but looking at it, and even from my interactions online, this has some, I would almost say, addictive tendencies.
Absolutely does. It lights up the same reward center of the brain. You get that same
Dopamine
rush. Yeah.
So, and I would be interested to find out whether or not it only happens when you really like something or when you actually dislike it. And I bet we could probably find an article, or you could while we're talking. But as I look through this, it seems like we are gearing ourselves towards this constant reward or constant stress, maybe even something that is triggering the adrenaline system, and it literally becomes an addiction. You have to have it. You have to check that notification when you hear that bell. And what's funny, I don't know.
I'm actually going to interrupt you here, but while I'm thinking of it, because again, I'm not braining and it's going to flit right out of my brain as soon as I don't think about it anymore, which is how that works. Yes, I just sounded like a complete idiot. Just bear with me. My sister and I were talking about something similar to these lines a couple months ago. And I guess there's an app that you can download, of course, but it'll track how many times you pick up your phone to look at it. And so she kind of on a one-off, like, oh no, I don't do it that bad. And it was in the hundreds for a single day that she was picking up this phone to look at it. I mean, think about it. Do you really have a reason to pick up your phone and check it 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day? If I get an email, my phone will ding and let me know, which is what the main purpose was. Typically, if I get a text message, it will ding and let me know. But I'm still picking up my phone and checking. I'm still picking up my phone and refreshing. I'm still picking up my phone and checking the news or checking Facebook or going through old pictures or scanning through. It's all the time. And how many of us forget our phones at home and you have that feeling like you have to go back? How many people will turn around and be late to work wherever they're going to make sure that they have their stupid phone? It's insane. It absolutely is. It's something that's so much a part of our everyday lives, we don't even realize it.
I would agree with you, and I would be willing to wager that we have people in our audience that would, myself included, turn back around to go back and get your phone. But if you left something for work, you would just leave it and show up to work, which is truly more important. That which you use to pay your bills, or your flippin' phone that you use to not have money for your bills. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that there was an app for that. And knowing your sister, I'm surprised it's only 100. I bet there's a little bit of that fudging of the numbers.
I didn't say it was 100. It was in the hundreds. Hundreds.
Good God. But no, I can definitely see that with her. She can't put the thing down, it seems, sometimes. But I mean, we've all got our sources of entertainment. But you're right. And the thing I was going to say before we talked about this app, it's really funny when you have a group of people together and a Facebook notification goes off and you've got 6 people reaching for their phone all at the same time. They've got to have that reward. It's like the food pellet coming into the cage, and we're just a bunch of lab mice reacting to whatever the notification is. And I'm not above it either, guys. I've got a Facebook account. Our page obviously has a Facebook account. And for me, the majority of what I'm reading is stuff that's either going to piss me off or piss everyone else off. I don't see very much cat pictures or anything like that. It's here's another atrocity committed either by a government agent or by a government at large.
Yeah, but you also do those really stupid song pun memes that just, oh my God.
They're not stupid.
They're stupid.
They're funny.
They're not funny. It's just, I mean, it's
I don't even
not.
know you anymore. Who are you?
I'm just being honest.
Well, after that tragic bit of news, let's see if we can get back to the subject that's at hand. This social media, let's just call it social media addiction, or dopamine addiction, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I mean, even beyond the addiction part of it, when we knew we were going to kind of go down this path, I did, as you said, start looking up information on it and what's out there. At what point HP Labs did a review or a study on the effects of social media, and they actually found that it directly messes with your ability to think independently. Within the study, they had presented people with choices on offering their own opinions on some things, which kitten is the cutest one in the bunch, for example. And after a period of time where they had stepped away from it and then came back and were exposed to all the other opinions that were on there, suddenly their ideas changed. And it was with relatively high percentages across the board that this independent thought was bending to essentially peer pressure for what was available within, which kitten is the cutest, basically. So it's interesting when you start going down that path where, like we said, when it comes into thinking critically, part of that is being able to do so independently and look up and decide for yourself on things. But that's something that's starting to pull away more and more, it seems.
You saying it makes perfect sense. As I'm looking at it from the outside, I could absolutely see that. I can remember looking at posts, and those of you that do have social media accounts, I challenge you to do the same. How many times do you look to see how many likes or dislikes something has? How many laugh reacts or hearts? And how much influence does that have over how you feel? Because it's almost like we look through these social media posts through the lens of our peers. And most of these peers are people we have never met. I've got probably 1,200, maybe more friends, and I use that word loosely on Facebook. Some of them I know in real life, but the vast majority of these people I've never met and probably never will meet. But how much influence is this pool of people having on your everyday life? How much is that coloring what it is you believe and what it is you perceive? We've talked about echo chambers before, I believe, on here. I know you and I have talked about it, where we have this tendency of surrounding ourselves by people that are like-minded in order to not be challenged in our views, because challenging our views, challenging our identities is a threat to our core, our belief system, who we are, who we identify as. So looking at that, most of us want to be in that popular crowd. And if 300 people are liking this, we don't want to be the person that's disliking it. And anyone that does, we automatically assume they're a troll, that there's someone out just to do something different. If you don't like it, then just don't react and keep scrolling, I think is the mentality we seem to keep. But this harkens back to elections, in my opinion. How many times during an election do you hear, well, that person that you really want is not going to get elected? You're going to throw away your vote if you vote for them.
Right,
So,
but also look who's saying this. It's not always the people that you know saying it. A lot of times you have those celebrity endorsements that are making the big jump in these things where they're actively pursuing these people to speak out for them. Now, obviously there's no paid endorsement or anything like that I'm aware of in most cases, but I mean, look at our culture the way it is. Our royal family here is pretty much the Kardashians, and that tells you enough, I think. Beyond that, and beyond that being the scope of what gets the attention and what people are vying and trying for, you also have these social media influencers who are making hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, not doing a whole lot other than taking pictures of their food or themselves, going to glamorous places that none of us can afford. It's a crazy, crazy world that I don't think existed even, 15 years ago?
probably not. And what's interesting, I mean, this, in my opinion, this adds gravity to what I was saying. We want so bad to be in the popular crowd that when we see someone like your celebrity endorsement, call it the Kardashians, whoever it is, we want to identify with being part of the cool crowd. So we do whatever it is that we can to support them, even if they'll never know our names by any stretch of the imagination. You said royal family. That brings something obviously right to mind. The actual royal family. They recently had a child that was all over the news. I don't understand why the people over there in the UK would be so obsessed with it. Now, again, and I know someone would make this argument, why are we so obsessed with the Kardashians? I get it.
Well, but that level of celebrity has always existed. Within the royal family, whenever the royal child was born, it was a huge event. That's something that I think it goes far, far, far back in history.
It does. It's part of that culture, but this
Right.
is again reinforcing that on a smaller level, before the advent of social media, that this existed. I mean, we've had it, whether it be the Beatles, whether it be Elvis in
Exactly.
music, whether it be movie stars, you name it, any form of popular media where we can identify, what is the word I want to look at? The word I want to look at. Good Lord. It must
I'm
be
rubbing
catching.
off on you, I know,
You are
sorry.
rubbing off. No, where you live vicariously.
Mm-hmm.
So that vicariously, you too can be a celebrity, even if only for a moment, even only a portion, because you and whoever this is agrees. And it is used with sufficient gravity that, just like you said, these spokespeople are coming out that become the leaders of these movements, whether it be Alyssa Milano, like we were talking about in The Politics of Sex, or like Charleston Heston with the NRA. Having these celebrities hold a particular political, religious, or whatever else view makes us either very attracted to becoming like them and then holding that view so that we too can identify with that group, or it pushes us away.
Right. But you're discussing something that I think has always existed to a certain extent. You know, be it figures in history like Marie Antoinette setting fashion standards. And this was back in, the 18th century? That's something that's gone on, I think, as long as there have been people. That's, I think, very indicative of our nature. What I think is happening now is that there are the means to share that more efficiently, more effectively, and many times a day, whereas before it was only in occasional newspaper broadcasts or through a movie or a premiere or, an actual event where they showed up. Now it's something you are getting inundated with every day on a regular basis. I think sometimes that the technology has grown so fast, maybe we haven't caught up to adapting to it yet in a healthy way. I don't know.
I've heard this argument before. Biologically speaking, we have not advanced that much. We're still in possession of very primitive organs, whether it be our wisdom teeth, the appendix, for instance, things that harken back to our beginning as a species here on planet Earth. Whereas our technology and our reach in the things we are able to do and our interconnectivity has exploded at a rate that is much, much beyond even comprehension, in my opinion. If you sit down and realize what you can do with a few swipes on the keyboard now, I mean, we're used to it.
We're used to it, but I think that's the cosmic joke. When you talk about thinking critically and being able to do things, as I said a few minutes ago, even 15 years ago, things didn't exist the way they do now. There was no Snapchat, Instagram, maybe Facebook or something was in its very, very, very early phase. But this social media as it stands now didn't exist. And what was interesting is you see that surge of invention and innovation coming in shortly after that period. But now it's so much, there we have access to all of this information, but no, like you said, critical thinking skills. When I was growing up, if you wanted to form an opinion on something, you really had to look into it. You had to research it and know your ins and outs and the whys and why do you think that and how does it work. You had to think critically. You had to dig deeper. Everything now is surface. It's all surface. And the minute anybody starts trying to press you on it, you're being attacked and you deflect. It's created a very interesting situation.
Yeah, it's very much like the box of instant mashed potatoes where you just add a little bit of water, no reason, and there you go. You've got something sufficiently bland that the vast majority of people will like it, or like McDonald's food. And I know we're not talking about food, but it always ends up, it seems, going down that road. I've got an idea of why I think this may be on the rise, but before we get into that, I do want to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor for this episode. I want to take a quick moment to talk about the app that makes this podcast possible, Anchor.fm. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place to create, record, and edit your podcast so it sounds great. Best part, it's absolutely free. They will help you distribute your podcast as well, so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many, many more. Anchor also makes it very easy to monetize your podcast by hooking you up with sponsors right off the bat, so you can begin to make money with no minimum listenership. And all you need to do is go to anchor.fm or download the Anchor app, and you too can get started today. All right, guys, welcome back. We left off talking about mashed potatoes. No, we had something a little more in depth that we wanted to talk about. I've got an idea, and I kind of want to flesh this out with you and see what you think, Evelyn. Have you ever heard of postmodernist or postmodernism?
Only in a very limited capacity, but for the interest of this, why don't you go ahead and give it a more in-depth explanation?
I don't want to go too in-depth, but it is... it's an answer to modernist thought, postmodernism, but at its core, there seems to be a rejection of knowledge. And what I mean by knowledge is not ignorance. I mean that postmodernists, do not feel that there's any reliable method to determine whether or not knowledge is actually viable. There's no way to determine if knowledge is even real. And typically what we hear it boil down to is a person's personal experience is their reality. Their experience is the only thing that they can know. Therefore, there's nothing that exists outside of your perception of reality. Because of that, we have seen a rise in fracturing of traditional values. And before we even go into this, I don't want anyone listening to this think that I necessarily value tradition over progress. I don't think there's a reason to value one more heavily than the other. Progress for progress's sake has proven to be dangerous. And of course, clutching onto old ideas like they're a clutch of pearls is equally as dangerous. In this case, where I kind of take a little bit of issue is the fact that there is no truth, there is no reason, there is no logic. This is what I experience. And from this, we see I identify as a mermaid, therefore I am a mermaid. I identify as this, so you have to treat me as this. You are a racist, misogynist, sexist, whatever, and I don't even have to have the evidence to support that, because as long as I experience your comments and your actions in such a way, that is the reality.
So basically, there is no objective reality. There is no logic or truth. Just emotions trump everything.
It would have to be. If there's no way to guarantee that, to any reasonable extent, that knowledge is real, then reason can't be real.
So critical thinking, therefore, is not only not necessary, but it runs contrary to logic.
Yes. It would be the antithesis of logic and of reason. And it exists, obviously, outside of philosophy. It has roots in arts, science. In fact, a lot of postmodernists reject science and scientific discovery because if you haven't experienced that discovery, then there's no way to know that it's real. So it's almost borderline nihilism. I wouldn't say it's nihilistic, but down to its core, it's very difficult to reason with an individual that holds these views.
Okay, so how is the postmodernist thought tying into the social media discussion for you?
A lot of our reactions are based on self-identity, the way that I experience a particular post, the way that I experience your words, the likes, the dislikes. My experience of it and my identity is built upon my experience of these things. Therefore, myself, the only thing that I can know is either being reinforced or is under threat by insert whatever, your post, your meme, your thoughts.
Well, then how is that influenced by the peer pressure aspect, where people are changing their opinions based on things that they have not experienced, only based upon the opinions of others?
I would argue that the peer pressure holds a very heavy sway over it because I want to experience the happiness that comes from the reinforcement of the rest of the people agreeing with what I am saying. I also want the reinforcement of joining the group that is decrying an action that I experience as negative in some way.
Okay. I could see that. Yeah, that actually reminds me of one of the articles I wanted to bring up. It ties in really well with this. One of the last areas I wanted to do, because again, my knowledge of the effects of social media are very limited. I haven't done any experiments. All I have is my basic observations of the people around me. So I did want to find something somewhat scientific. Know that it goes against postmodernist thought, but hey, I'll go with it.
Apologies all around.
Yes. There was another study done by Psychology Today where they really took a look at the brain and its relationships and their inherent reactions to social media. Now, one of the things they open this with is the fact that the humans are still an organism. Social media is essentially considered to be the new tribal fire, as they phrase it. But they point out that human biology really hasn't changed much in 50,000 years, unlike human technology. Obviously, our society is considerably more complex and diverse than it was 56 million years ago. But what's essentially happening is that and I'm going to try to paraphrase this down, and I do not have medical training, so there may be some mispronunciations here as well. But the ventral tegmental area of our brain, known as the VTA, is essentially what monitors our social needs and releases dopamine when we achieve social successes, but also releases neurochemical deficits when we don't. So basically that big rush when you do something really well, and that really dragging down feeling when something bad happens or when you fail.
One thing I want to kind of drop in here, not to derail it, but if I remember correctly, there was a study shown, at least with males, because obviously this would not apply with females, that whenever a team that they strongly associate with loses, they have a drop in testosterone. But if that team wins, especially if they associate with it very heavily, they see an increase in testosterone. Some of the articles that I've looked at said it's very much part of the primitive part of our brains that in a instance where we would be fighting for a mate, for instance, which we would have done tens of thousands of years ago, it is a way to make sure that the one that is the victor is the one that is most likely to be breeding, or at least have those urges with the increased testosterone.
Right,
which
so
helps.
the circumstances have changed, but the more primitive aspects that lead to that emotion are still there.
As you said, our biology hasn't
Right.
changed.
Essentially, and that's a good point. This article is discussing how the VTA is essentially the old brain and how it's not really well equipped to deal with social media. This new development has come on so fast, our brains, like we're talking about, really haven't caught up yet. So the VTA essentially relies on physiological cues to determine social status from negative social media experiences and tie those into the same as those occurring within our ancestors' brains when they were banished from the tribe. Does that make sense?
So let me see if I can make sure I understand this. So a part of our brain that, let's say if we were in a primitive society and a tribalistic society, and if we were going to be outcast from the tribe or from the group, that this response is in direct relation to something that evolved due to that.
Okay, so essentially what is happening is that the response your brain would have had way back when, say you were ostracized from the group, the same things that are happening in the brain for that instance are what is happening due to the cues that we're getting from social media. They have a negative experience on there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for clarifying.
No, you're fine. I actually had to read over the article a couple of times. It's fine. I actually had to read over the article a couple of times just to make sure that I was very clear on that. But to be clear, they're discussing the fact that the VTA can't think. It only reads signals and reacts. That's why people waste hours and hours online arguing about things that they have no control over. It's not a response about Facebook or whatever Snapchat, Twitter war is going on. It's actually a reaction of the natural human fear of being cast out or rejected in some way. Now, again, what I'm describing here is what is listed within this article. Again, giving credit over to Psychology Today. If you want to check it out, please do. But I'm communicating what is written within this. I'm trying to put it into my own words as much as possible, but they actually phrased it really well. So, again, the response is a direct response to what we see as a physiological situation.
So, this physiological, and again, I know you're not a psychologist. We're going to base this on you reading this article. So we're experiencing a physiological response to the feeling of being ostracized.
Right. So we're essentially responding to it as though it's a threat. So when people say that they feel threatened in some way, they really are responding within the brain to what your brain is perceiving as a threat.
Let me ask you this question. Again, this is just going to be a hypothetical shoot from the hip. Do you think that one of the reasons it's so elevated on social media is we don't have those facial cues that we depend on so heavily to determine the intentions of the person we're talking to?
I think that can be a part of it sometimes, but again, I think it's that almost like that herd mentality. You don't want to be left out of the group like you were talking about.
Absolutely.
There's that threat that they'll ostracize you and that you won't be a part of that cool clique anymore, as you were phrasing it before. If you don't toe the line, if you don't follow suit, if you don't say the things that on some level you know are meant to be said if you're a part of that group.
Well, during this time, I can imagine that being ostracized would have an enormous impact on your survivability. There have been many that have argued that the entire reason that we join together in tribes is for cooperation, because each individual has separate skills, things they're good at, things they're not good at, but almost as a primitive insurance as well. If we got hurt, that other people might potentially help care for us, provide food for us, help us with our children. And then we can multiply our efforts many times over. But going back to the physiological cues, when I have a conversation with you and you go, and you've got a big smile on your face, said, "You're a bastard." Well, I know you mean it, because you always mean it, but I know you're joking as well. Or you could say, "I'm going to fucking kill you," with a smile on your face. That's a lot different than if you've got an angry look on your face. So on this Facebook app, you don't have the ability to see or determine the true intentions of whoever you're talking about. So the risk is elevated many times over.
Right. And that's what you're talking about. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks for agreeing with me. I appreciate it.
No, you're fine. It's, again, I think it's easier to take anything that people say out of context very easily when it's only in print form. There's so many idiosyncrasies that happen when you're having a face-to-face or even a voice conversation. There's inflection, there's dialect, there's, as you said, facial expressions, body language. There's so much that goes into communication that happens on a nonverbal level face-to-face, or even through the means on here. If I was having a really horrible day, which again, today my day isn't great, and I'm sure it's audibly different from where I was at last week, just due to the fact that I'm physically in pain today. But again, if we had everything just in written form and had a transcript of our podcast, you wouldn't know if I didn't say it. So I think there's a lot to what you're saying there as well.
Yeah, there is. And what we started out with was this uproar based on a still image. You have no context. So it goes beyond even just the written word. I think communication is an active, ongoing, fluid action. And those, when we don't have the ability to receive those clues, bad things happen. And then it's elevated or exacerbated by the fact that we have this fear of being ostracized, that our very survival depends on being part of this group.
You know, you brought up a group aspect, though, and this is where and I'm going to throw it back to that article again, because this is where it got really interesting for me. And this is where they start talking about the hippocampus. So that's the memory area of the brain. And they're discussing how the hippocampus is continuously comparing their experiences with the external world to the brain's core belief of how the world should be. Which that got me thinking about what you're talking about with identifying within those groups, because I think for a lot of those people, when they hit that group, that's what their ideal is of what they think the world should be, or what their ideal world would be. So then when they're starting to experience everything else, it's filtering through that hippocampus and is then comparing it to what their ideal is. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it's not going to live up to that ideal.
Right. So when they do experience that discrepancy between that external world and that brain's core belief, that's where that threat comes in, which then activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, initiating a stress response. So essentially it signals the amygdala when that discrepancy. So when that discrepancy occurs, it signals the amygdala in according to the threat, and that's when you have that stress. So that's when you start getting these crazy stress responses over stuff that doesn't matter. When you have people flipping out over that Beyonce article and sending death threats, they have an actual stress response where their blood pressure goes up. They go into flight or fight mode. It's an insane thing when you're really looking at it, and then you start going through this article and seeing how everything's being broken down. You're like, holy shit, that actually makes sense. It's not right, and I think it's crazy we've gotten to that point. But again, our brains have not evolved anywhere near as fast as technology has. And so we're still responding to things in a biological way to a technological world.
Well, just think about the difference of what we just did here. You've got this post that immediately piqued your interest, even on a small level. You're like, Jesus, these people, I can't
even if
believe
it's on an eye roll level, it's still something that grabs you and you're just like, oh boy.
Right.
Okay.
But you are doing the exact opposite. You actually spent some time and you went digging. Why does this happen? As opposed to just responding, as opposed to doing what everyone else does when they see something they either agree with or disagree with, they miss the big aspect here, and that's critical thinking, something that's getting pushed away. We hear it all the time. Why don't our educators teach critical thinking? Well, it's not part of the world that is being constructed. If your experience determines your reality, critical thinking has no role in it. You have to realize that there is a world outside of who you are. We're creating generations of narcissists.
Right, but I don't think it falls completely on the education system in that either.
No, I said we.
Right. Well, you said, why isn't that being stressed in education? I think, and I actually know some people who work in there, and that's one of their big points of contention, is the fact they keep trying to get kids to think critically. They keep trying to get them to think on a deeper level. But everything that happens outside of school, and even sometimes within the home environment and with friends, everything is so immediate that patience level isn't there to do that.
Right. And I may not have been as clear as I needed to be. What I'm saying is that we often say, why are they not being taught this in education? And here's the reason. I'm not laying at the foot of education. I imagine you teach your girls critical thinking. I know I teach my children critical thinking all the time. I want them to be skeptics. I want them to question everything.
Exactly.
Except whether or not to eat broccoli tonight. I don't want any question about that. But there's a reason for it. I know that was supposed to be funny, but damn it, they got to have their veggies. But I don't want anyone in here to think that I am laying this at the feet of education, because even as an individual teacher, you are constrained by what you can and cannot do by curriculums that are bought by people that haven't been in a classroom teaching for a very long time. And these are curriculums designed by people that, in my opinion, don't have our children's best interest at heart. And I don't want to go down the education thing. I wanted to make sure that this is very clear, that every day each one of us have the opportunity, whether it be friends, family, co-workers, to challenge them to think critically about what they're reading, what they're saying. It only takes a couple of questions to typically expose the fact that they are just siding with what they want to believe as opposed to what is really at the core cause. Did you ask this question? Do you think it might be because of this? 2 to 3 questions, usually all it takes, and then you just see that kind of glazed over look. Well, I never thought about it like that. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm asking questions in hopes that you will spend the time to do exactly what you did here, Evelyn, and actually find an article. Why do people act this way? I would have just said it's because people are assholes, because, I just hate people.
Right. But, right. So while you were talking, though, it got me thinking about, well, I mean, we're probably going back years now to when you were still, I think, considering yourself more conservative, more of a Republican. How many years did you go really not looking any deeper and just kind of following that party line, though?
Oh, I'm absolutely guilty of this. This is not me
I'm not saying that you were accepting
pedestal.
yourself from it. I'm just saying on a personal level, because I never had a dog in the fight, but I remember how fervently you defended things. And it's easy to research on a surface level and find things that support your idea, but most people don't go, like you said, on that critical thinking level and find things that oppose it to really challenge themselves.
I want to make sure I preface this correctly. I'm speaking from experience here. This is not Sermon on the Mount or Sermon from the Porcupine. I obviously live this. I'll be honest. I'll admit this on air. I voted for John McCain. And, God, what was her name from Alaska? I guess it doesn't really matter.
Sarah Palin?
Sarah Palin, yes. The unforgettable one. I voted for them because I was like, no, we can't let Obama get in office. We're going to lose our guns. We're going to get this. We're going to get that. That wasn't too terrible long ago if we think about it. And now you're talking to a person that would never vote. I hate to say it. I don't want anyone to die, but I think the world was a better place when John McCain left because he's a war hawk. I don't know how many people have died because of what he wanted, his wishes, his hopes, and the way that he helped steer our country to invade countries that we didn't belong in. I hate to say it. I hate to speak ill of the dead, but again, the truth is the truth. Now I look back and I go, God, I wish somebody would have kicked me in the ass years ago. How much further along would I be? If you imagine all this stuff is baggage that we all carry around, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, it doesn't matter whatever your beliefs are. These are extra baggage that you carry, and you're walking down the road of life. Anyone that has had to carry a heavy load for any amount of time knows that you travel much slower. If we just release this baggage, we would move so much faster and so much further as a group of humans if we could just let it go.
Yeah, it's a good point, though. Then on the last note, I'll just wrap up that whole thing with that article. It was really trying to point out that when we're under that much stress all the time, and when you're responding to that stress all the time, it sends that part of your brain into overdrive and it starts having physical effects on us. That's why we're having the rise in
obesity, diabetes.
Right.
Yeah,
even rises in cancer, which again, they're not saying there's a causation. What do you say? Correlation isn't causation. But there is some evidence there that there's some tie-in under high-stress environments that it opens up your body to more susceptibility in that area. So, I mean, it's something that you're talking about slowing us down. It's literally dragging us down. It's making us sick.
Yeah, and the only thing that was cited in the article, and that's why I was hesitant to mention it, is the fact that one of the chemicals that the body releases is simple glucose for quick energy in a fight or flight. And because of its effect on insulin, it can throw a lot of things out of whack, and it definitely doesn't help people that are prone to diabetes by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't know, there may be a correlation with American sugar intake or at least Western culture sugar intake and social media that,
we ended up on sugar intake with social media. That's interesting.
I'm not saying it exists.
No, it's fine. Again, it's just one of those deals where, I mean, this all branched off from what can we talk about this week? And I'm like, I don't know. The only thing that's on here is all this stuff about Beyonce. And it's one of those situations, as you say, a lot of the times it leads you down a weird rabbit hole where we're on here, and I enjoy having the conversations that we do and getting your perspective on things. And as we've discussed many times, I don't agree with you all the time, and quite often I don't. But I have the means of expressing my own ideas here without walking away pissed off because you didn't agree. And I hope in doing this that we're able to get people to start looking into things themselves that way and having these conversations in a way without having all of that surface immediate fight or flight reaction to things, and just sitting back and listening and engaging in a conversation. That's my hope here. And I sometimes wonder, especially in circumstances like this if we're not way behind the beast, so to speak.
I think we are, and I think anyone that believes they can free everyone from this mindset is mistaken. I hope I'm wrong, but I will say something. I have to change one more avenue of my thinking.
What's up?
I truly never thought that anything meaningful would come from Beyonce. And look what happened.
You said you didn't even know who she was.
I know enough to know that nothing meaningful is ever going to come from her.
You know you were doing that single ladies dance and bobbing your
And on that note, guys, thank you so much for joining us yet again. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget, 5-star rating, subscriptions, help us out. We greatly appreciate it. We'll see you next episode.
Always look back over your shoulder. Waiting around to make your move. Don't hold back, come on and get down to it. Live your life the way that you want to.